welcome back to another authorship video. In this video, I will be discussing an overview of my progress, what I'm currently working on, and some methods that I'm using personally to organize this ginormous novel project that I'm working on. I highly recommend watching the first video so that way you can kind of understand my background a little bit and where I am and where I started with this process, and then you can come back to this video. In the first episode, I went over my writing background a little bit, and then I covered my Notion setup. So I showed you my database on brainstorming, research links, characters, world building, etc., etc. And I will leave a link to that video in the description box below, so that way you can check that out first and then come back to this video. So I assume that you have viewed that video and I'm going to start this video out with some lessons that I learned from previous writing mistakes. Okay, so the first thing I would say I learned from writing what I have written so far, which is kind of minimal, I would say is outlines are very necessary. I know a lot of people are either identifying as an outliner or a pantser, but I don't think you can be 100% a pantser, and I don't think you can be a 100% outliner as well. I think it's really a combination. I actually tried pantsing, just soul pantsing. I created a few characters, came up with a few names, and had a few, descriptive thoughts about how they looked, and then I just started writing. And I would say a couple of them, I got to chapter 6 or 8 or something along those lines, and then I just kind of gave up because I had no idea of what direction I was going in. I did not know my characters very well. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know really how to set up the bone structure for a novel, like a beginning, end, and middle, for instance. I just pantsed. I just had a composition notebook and I started writing, and I wrote whatever came to mind, and then I got to a stopping point because I guess I hit a writer's block, which will happen, I feel, 100% of the time when you're pantsing, and I had no idea where to go, and so I just gave up on the project. So for this one, I am outlining what I can, and then I'm pantsing the rest of the way. I would say I'm probably a 75% outliner and then a 25% pantser. Because, when you get to that stopping point or writer's block, another thing that I learned is you are looking at the page, and a blank page can look very intimidating because you have no idea where you're going. You have no direction. You are lost because you have no outline to refer to. So I said, okay, when I start my next novel, I am going to outline, because you will get to a stopping point and you will experience writer's block. And it's just kind of inevitable with 100% pantsing method. So I am outlining so that way I have something to refer to when I get stuck, and that way I can keep the momentum of writing when it comes to that point. Okay, so to start off, some of my progress and then also some tips that I have tried and I recommend. For my chapter sequencing, I am kind of outlining, I'm fleshing out the chapters essentially. And I will pop some images on the screen of what it looks like. But basically, I am using the call-out box feature on Notion. And I'm doing most of my project on Notion, which you probably gathered from the first video if you watched it. And I am putting that as the first sort of box under each chapter heading. And basically, it kind of looks like a play. So if you look at Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, and you look in the book or manuscript, whatever you want to call it, you'll see that there's a list of characters. And so that's what I'm doing as well. So that way, when I'm mapping out key points in each chapter, I know who is in each chapter, and I'm not going to add this random character that really does not belong in that chapter. So it gives me a guide on who's in the chapter, who's not in the chapter, and who the main character will be communicating with and dialoguing with, and who they're not going to be communicating with. So yeah, it's kind of a good quick reference if I need it. And then underneath the character box, I have a main point of the chapter. And in that main point, that's basically my guide. I use that to kind of go back to a certain theme for each chapter. And that way I'm not veering off into wild directions. And it kind of helps keep me on point, and it helps the key points at least flow. So I'm not throwing this random key point in there and I have nowhere to put it, and I'm a little lost on what to do with it. So it helps kind of skeleton out the chapter, if you will, by giving me a starting point, or an overall theme of the chapter. And then underneath that, I have details. That's where I keep all of the key points for each chapter. And then for the end of the chapter, I have an end of chapter call box as well, or a call out box for end of chapter. And that's a note for myself. So that way I know how the chapter ends. And that way I can kind of get an idea of how the next chapter begins. So I basically have the main point, so an overall theme. I have details. I know which characters are in the chapter, and I have an ending point. So that way each ending point helps me figure out the starting point of the next chapter. So as you can see, I can kind of get a good ending point, starting point, and then flesh out the middle as needed. Okay, on to character development. I've been very diligent with the chapter sequencing and also the character development part. I incorporated the images in Notion in the Notion database I showed, and I usually refer back to that when I'm doing the sequencing, the chapter sequencing, if I need a visual. But I actually transferred, well, I actually didn't really transfer because I didn't add anything, but I started doing the character development on a software called Xtiles. And I actually find this very helpful because I feel like if I'm staring into Notion all the time, I will get very bored, and I don't think the ideas will come to me sometimes or as much. So by using this different software, it gives me a new image, a new view to look at, if you will. And I feel like the creative juices could start flowing again if I get stuck, or it's just kind of nice to look at something different, because if you're looking at Notion all the time, I just feel like it sort of hinders your creativity, if that makes sense, because you're staring at the same thing and you get a little frustrated because you may not have any ideas coming. You're looking at the same thing. So I've been using that, and it's been working very well. I'll add, and I'll again show some images on the screen. I added a picture of what the character looked like, and I have underneath the picture the name, place of birth, date of birth, things like that under the picture. And then on the right side, I'll have different questions like personality traits, and then I use the toggle feature. And then that way in the toggle feature, I can hide the answer, and I can quickly sift through the questions that I have and search by question and not get so bombarded with all of the information. And yeah, it's been working out really well for me. It's sort of set up similar in a call box type of format, but they're not called call boxes on Xtiles. So yeah, I highly recommend using that for your character development, or at least try it and see how you like it. I like it. It's been working for me. And then lastly, world building. I have not been as active in the world building, but I did create one thing, and it is in my Notion. I kept that one in Notion. I referred to my research and my brainstorm ideas, and then based on that, I looked up some things and I found photos, and I decided to incorporate photos into my world building. So that way it gives me some ideas as to what I'm trying to picture. And I think that in turn is actually helping me character develop and create some of the key points in each chapter. I just feel like it's all kind of intertwining. I think the character development and the chapter sequencing have been very complementary for me because I've been working on both simultaneously, and I switch between the two. And I was incorporating world building as well, but I stopped the world building because I have not been as interested in it at the moment. I'm trying to flesh out the chapters and the characters first, and then get to the world building once I get to a good stopping point or get to a good amount of information on that. But yeah, that's basically how I'm doing the world building. And then for dialogue, I originally, when it comes to dialogue, I thought I need to start writing because I'm getting dialogue ideas. So I thought, well, why don't I just write down the idea and come back to it later? So this is the organization method that I created for dialogue specifically, and I placed it in the characters database tab that I showed you in the first video. So that way I can easily go back to it. So this is how I'm setting up my dialogue and organizing it. So I'm using the call out box and I'm labeling the dialogue ideas per idea. So dialogue idea 1, dialogue idea 2. As you can see, this one's labeled 1. And then underneath I have the placement. So whether it be chapter 1, chapter 2, or I could put chapter 1 or chapter 2 like I have here. Or I could put chapter 1, 2, and 3. If I'm not sure which chapter, I might put chapter question mark. And then I have the line that I want to insert in the book. I just made this up. This has nothing to do with my actual novel, but just to kind of give you an idea of what a dialogue idea would look like and what it would look like in the dialogue call out box. And then I put who I think would say it or who I see saying it in the novel. So that way, when I do actually go to write the novel, chapter by chapter, I know who says it and I know which chapter to place it in, or at least I have an idea of which chapter to place it in. Because if I don't have any idea which chapter to put it in, then I will be going through multiple chapters probably at one point, and that would take up a lot of time. So I categorize and number each idea and placement for each dialogue idea. And that way, when I go back to look, I know where to place it. So that's how I am organizing and creating new dialogue ideas for the novel. So that way, when I do get to that point, I can go back and insert that. So that is how I'm organizing my ideas for this novel. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this gave you some insight into how you might want to organize your novel. If it did, please leave me a comment as to which organization method you will try or have tried, and if it worked for you or not. And I will see you in the next video.